Good morning, everybody. This is Joel Lawson with the Missouri Public Utility Alliance, and we'd like to welcome you to our webinar on the grid impacts of electric vehicles. Patrick and Kevin, please take it away.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you guys letting us talk to you today, and MPUA for helping get this set up. So we'll talk a little bit about things that may be approaching a lot of municipal utilities over the next few years to next couple of decades. So today our learning outcomes look at what's going on with electric vehicles, what the trends are, both for the vehicle manufacturers as well as the incentives and legislation that's going on right now. Look at how people charge electric vehicles and how that will affect the utilities and how they serve their customers. Pat's going to go through and do some examples of what some of your customers might be seeing, especially on the fleet side, for installation and equipment changes that will need to be made. And then I'm going to follow up with talking about load management and what utilities can do to help influence their customers to charge their cars at particular times of day. CDG Engineers, you all talked about us. I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we do related to electric utilities on the T&D side, distribution engineering and energy storage, line design, and then substation equipment and testing and system protection and control. My name is Kevin Cox. I've been in the industry for over 20 years now. My specialty is in generation planning, resource planning, and system planning, but I have also led up our electrical engineering department historically. Pat McEvoy will be joining us. He's our current electrical engineering department manager. He's been working in the utility industry for almost 15 years now, and his specialty is in power generation, power distribution, and controls. So we're talking about electric vehicles today, and it's something that's been something that I've been following for a long time, but I also recently got into my early 40s, and so predictably I went out and bought a car. And so I got a electric vehicle about a year ago, and so part of this presentation is my experience with the process of owning an electric vehicle and what it takes to keep it charged, my behavior with it, and I think that that's going to be representative of what you might see of some of your customers. There's a lot of talk about the likelihood or the inevitability, depending on your perspective, of electric vehicles coming on the system. When you look at what the manufacturers are doing, you see, the big three, GM, Ford, and Stellantis. They're predicting that they are going to be all electric by, sometime next decade. They're investing billions of dollars. There's close to, $200 billion worth of investment just of these manufacturers that you see here. So, when it comes to the viability or inevitability, the reality is there's going to be electric vehicles that are going to be for sale, and your customers are going to be presented with this option. A lot of them are going to take it, and then now you have a new problem to deal with, or an opportunity, depending on your perspective. So you can see GM, Honda, Ford, VW is making a huge investment. Toyota is kind of lagging behind the rest of them, surprisingly, since they were the first people to kind of get into the hybrid movement. I think they kind of stuck with that a little bit longer, but they're pursuing new EVs in 2025. Volvo again is going to be 100% electric by the end of the decade. That's what they're projecting. The one that I am leaving out is Bentley, so they're going to be 100% electric too. Actually, I was joking. The elephant in the room is Tesla. They drive a lot of the EV market. They're 18% of the global EV market share, including plug-in electric vehicles. They have a lot that's going to be going on in the next year or two with the Cybertruck. Pretty divisive, but some people are really into it. The Roadster sports car supposedly due out next year, and then a mystery hatchback $25,000 car in the next year or two. You can take a lot of what Tesla puts out with a grain of salt, but if there's a $25,000 EV that's out there, that's going to be more of a mass market option, and will certainly change the adoption of electric vehicles. So locally, Missouri actually ranks 7th for electric vehicle charging access. So what does that mean? The ratio of charging stations to electric vehicles is 7th highest in the United States. Some of that is because we're quote unquote flyover drive-through country, and so there's a lot of charging stations along the east-west corridors through the state of Missouri. But if you look at the others that are in the top 10, Missouri is the highest population. They have the most electric vehicles of the states with a lot of access to charging. That does impact the cost benefit of moving to an electric vehicle. Ford is going to be building their e-Transit commercial van. You can see a picture of it there on the right. This is where our focus of this presentation is a little different in that the effect of a larger customer that changes out a fleet has a dramatic impact on your distribution system, and so the viability of this going forward would be something that would certainly affect municipal utilities. Current legislation that's in the news right now, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the BIPIB, or Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, IIJA, was passed in October. Of that, there's close to, depending on how you count things up, close to $15 billion worth of incentives for electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure. Some of this is straight for charging stations. They have the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula that they're giving money to states to support new charging stations. Others are for allowing schools, for example, to have electric and zero emission buses. So again, what is that kind of fleet aspect? What effect does that have on local utilities? On the personal basis, I skipped the first bullet, but currently you can get up to $7,500 tax credit for an all-electric vehicle. This is limited, and the second half of the Clean Energy for America Act was supposed to expand that. Right now, that $7,500 tax credit only applies to brands that have less than 250,000 vehicles. So Tesla has bypassed that long ago. So there is no incentive for Tesla where it would for the VW or Polestar or the Ford, which is part of the reason why I got the one that I got. The Clean Energy for America Act, it was supposed to be $3.5 trillion. I don't think that anybody thinks that that's going to happen. If anything, it's going to be scaled down to about $600 billion, which is still a lot of money, but I think even that is kind of very much in doubt at this point. Alternatively, there are other initiatives to electrify governmental vehicles. The government, I think, is, the discussions are that they want to get to all electric vehicles by the middle of next decade. That's not going to work for everything, but it's definitely, again, that trend is going in that direction. So, we have seen a pretty slow adoption of electric vehicles. An example of what EV adoption could be like if a lot of these incentives come in is the country of Norway, which is kind of ironic because Norway gets a lot of their revenues from drilling in the North Atlantic for oil, but they did go down that route about 10 years ago. They started heavily subsidizing electric vehicles. It's one of the top 2 or 3 countries for Tesla purchases, even though it's not particularly populous. So when you look at the way that their adoption has gone, right now, 77% of new cars sold were plug-in or full EV. 92% have some sort of battery power associated with them, either hybrid or EV or plug-in. And I kind of I don't really use the terms interchangeably. Sometimes you'll see plug-in electric vehicles, PHEV, or full EVs, BEVs, battery electric vehicles. Some of these statistics conflate the two, but in reality, when you look at like the Jeep 4xe Wrangler, it gets 40 to 50 miles just on the battery, and somebody that I know that has one, they put fuel in their car, quarterly. Like they almost never use gas. And so when you think about it from that aspect for a getting around car, it acts a lot like a full EV. And so it's important to kind of keep track of those as well when you're thinking about charging electric vehicles. Greater than 50% of all cars sold were EVs. So that's new cars and used cars. So they're really kind of moving in that direction. That's what people want to buy. 15, but at the same time, only 15% of all cars on the road are EVs. So even though the current purchases and the sales are going to EVs, only 15% of the cars on the road. So 10 years in, they had a dramatic change to their transportation, but at the same time, 85% of cars are internal combustion engines. And I thought that the last statistic is interesting, that 63% of households that have an EV also have a gas-powered car, and that's certainly true for my family. I could see a lot of people wanting an electric vehicle, but I really struggle to see people that only have electric vehicles. Like, it is really nice to have a gas-powered vehicle for getting around the state if you're going on any kind of road trip of any kind. It just makes life a little less anxious. So of this ramp up, we're right here. So we're about 10 years behind Norway. We have made progress, as you can see. They did as well. It was doubling each year, but at the same time, it's still a really small number, and that's where we are now. In the United States, battery-powered electric vehicles and plug-in electric vehicles accounted for 4.5% of new cars sold. And I would say of the two, the battery electric vehicles accounted for about 75% of those. Again, at the same time, though, less than 1% of cars on the road are EVs. So to the extent that you've noticed an impact on your system, you've kind of dealt with some of the issues associated with electric vehicles, really it's a very niche product at this point. So what does this mean for loads, for our demand and energy usage? I did a study in 2019 for a Southern Texas municipal electric system, and this was 2019, and it's a rural area, it's conservative, and so we did our best to kind of scale down the base adoption rate. But I did 3 different forecasts of what it meant for the residential load. If we continued at this niche penetration rate where it's really kind of only people that are early adopters or enthusiasts that want to get an electric vehicle, if they still remain all above $80,000 or some really expensive number, it's not going to really take hold. And so in that case, it's really only going to affect their residential loads by a couple of percent by the end of the next decade. The standard case that I had, had 22% of new cars coming from electric vehicles in 2038 or 2039. And that was about a 4% increase in loads. And then the high adoption, which is something more akin to what the Norway example was, had up to 7% of load coming from electric vehicles. And this is energy, not demand. So keep in mind that, this is over the course of 8,760 hours over the course of the year, not when everybody's plugging in at the same time. So this was done in 2019, and we were at 4.5%, which puts us actually a little bit ahead of the high adoption curve. So, with that in mind, if you were to extrapolate that out, we could be looking at 10% of loads coming from electric vehicles in by the end of next decade. And again, this is energy, not demand. So that the demand side is going to be the bigger impact because that's what you have to build for on the T&D side. So with that in mind, I kind of want to look at, when are people charging their vehicles and what kind of habits do they have? Before I get into that, though, I wanted to kind of talk about what the different types of charging are. I'm sure you've kind of already been made aware of this. Level 1 is just plugging into a standard 110 volt outlet. You can do it anywhere, but it is super slow. Like it's only going to add about 5 miles per hour of charge. So you would have to have it sit on the charger all weekend in order to be able to fill up your car with energy to drive. So it's not really a viable option, but it is one of the ways that you can charge a vehicle. Level 2 is with a 240 volt outlet. If you're going to go down this route, you have to get a separate charger put in that would add 20 to 60 miles per hour of charge. So this is what I use for my car. I can go from 20% to 85%, which is my charging range overnight without any issues. Level 3 is what you would see on the interstate. This is a DC charger, so it's at 480 volts. It's bypassing the internal AC to DC converter within the car, and it's supplying DC energy directly to the battery. So this allows it to add much more energy in a shorter amount of time. But the infrastructure of having a 480 volt charger is not something that anybody would realistically have at home. And maybe Elon Musk does, but I don't think anybody else could afford that. These are about $20,000 a piece. So it's mostly going to be for commercial use and mostly for getting people those kind of long haul charging environments. So most of the charging is going to be done at level 2, and 80% of charging for personal vehicles is done at home. And so for all of the talk and the IIJA, all of the supercharger stations, all of that stuff, it's really important for adoption, but at the same time, almost everyone's going to be doing their charging at home. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is it's super convenient. You just come home from work and you can plug your car in and not really have to think about it. It'd be like if you had a gas station at your house, how often would you go to the Quick Trip? Probably not very often, especially if it costs 2 to 3 times as much, which is the reality. If you go to a commercial charger, you're paying more than you would on your residential rate. So a typical installation for a level 2 charger, most of the cars will come with a charger. I think Tesla just recently stopped including the handheld charger with their vehicles. But what you as a homeowner need to do is either you will likely have to include either a 50 amp breaker and a plug, or a 60 amp hardwired connection to a level 2 charger, and those range between $250 and $700 depending on whether it's permanently mounted or if it's a temporary cord-based charger. You know, when you're looking at adding a new 50 amp breaker, you're potentially looking at an upgraded service, which may potentially result in needing more a different transformer at the pole or on the ground if you have an underground system. And you know, these impacts can happen somewhat silently. And so one of the things that another gentleman that I talked to about this mentioned, he's from the Iowa Municipal Utilities Association. He mentioned that, you know, having even a small rebate associated with a level 2 charger from your system could give you the opportunity to make sure that these are getting installed appropriately and have a touch point to know, you know, where these are going in. Because one of the things that can happen is if you have a distribution system, you know, in a neighborhood and one person gets a new car, sometimes the neighbor wants to get the new car, or 2 or 3 people see them driving around and they want to do it. And so now you have this multiplying effect that could result in needing some distribution upgrades. And if you have that customer touch point, you can kind of see this coming before it impacts your system. This is looking at the different charging stations that have come on over the last 10 years. And these are, you know, both at commercial facilities and then over the road. So we're in about 2012 right now. A lot of these are for the Nissan Leaf, which was the first plug-in car that got any traction. The red ones that you see coming in are the Tesla superchargers. You see them along I-70, I-90, I-80, I-40, building out along the interstate lines. 2017, 2018, you start seeing some of the Electrify America stations come in the Midwest that would be able to charge other different brands of vehicles besides just Teslas. They really come on in about 2020. You can see some of the blue and green ones in the state of Missouri that are some of the newer high voltage charging stations that have gone in the state of Missouri. So when you look at this, you know, that's a pretty big change. I mean, you don't see that level of infrastructure put in very often, and at the same time, it's pretty well accepted that we are nowhere close to where we need to be in order for mass market viability of electric vehicles. So for all of that, you know, we still have a long ways to go, and there will be a lot of opportunities to add some infrastructure to support this. So I've only used a high voltage DC charger once. It was one of the Ameren ones down at the Lake of the Ozarks. You know, you have to download an app on your phone. You have to put in your credit card. It took about 45 minutes. It stopped midway, so I had to go and restart my charging session. It's not super convenient. You know, it's not something you would want to do unless you had to. But in all, it took about 45 minutes to go from 20% to 80%. And it costs roughly about as much as it would cost to fill up a internal combustion engine vehicle, or at least it costs what it would have cost last summer. Now it's probably quite a bit less. So it was about $45 to charge up the vehicle. So this was my charging data for about a 3-month period. the takeaway is most of this charging was done really at the peakiest part of the peak of the day. That's when I got home from work. That's when I plugged in the car. And even though I plugged in at that time, only about 7 to 9 hours worth of charging actually took place. So there's no real incentive for me to start charging at 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. There's not a real impact on the customer if that were to be delayed. Yeah, so the charging sessions took 4 to 9 hours, and most of the charging took place during peak hours. This data is data from Caltech. So it's a university system. They kept data for all of their charging stations and all of their charging sessions. So there's about 30,000 charging sessions that were recorded. And this is pretty representative of what you would see at a office environment, an institution, maybe a governmental office where people are working during the day. I think this is pretty representative of that. And what you see is there are a lot of chargers that are used a whole lot, and there are some that are almost never used. I don't know if that's geography, proximity, or what's driving that, but I think a lot of it is so these are individual users. Each of them gets their own code, and you see this guy charges his car every day. I'm assuming it's a guy. There are a lot of people that clearly they get to work and they plug their car in every single day, which is fine. But what the problem is that they're showing up. So in this heat map, green is when energy is flowing, when people are plugged in and they are charging their batteries. And you can see that they are coming to work at 8 a.m. and they're charging, but they're pretty well filled for the most part by the middle of the day. But at the same time, they're connected all day. And so they're not really getting the value out of multiple chargers because people are sitting on them and hogging them all day. This isn't a utility problem per se, but it does kind of indicate that maybe they're without proper management, there will have to be more chargers than is necessary to get the kilowatt hours to the cars. Again, yeah, you see that most of the charging sessions are less than 5 kilowatt hours, which is about 5 to 10% of what the car would consume for an entire battery charge. So they're really just topping off most of the time. So the takeaway from that data, you can see this old school VW bus that apparently they converted to electric back in the 60s. So they've been at this for a while. Generally speaking, they're connecting in the morning, they're disconnecting in the late afternoon, but they're not really charging that much. So that's going to result in kind of inefficient and more infrastructure than is required for the kilowatt hours that are being consumed. So I think I'll hand it over to Pat at this point. He's going to talk a little bit about fleet electric vehicles and changes on the customer side to support those.
All right. Thanks. Can you hear me, Kevin?
Yep.
Okay. Yes, we want to talk more in depth about fleet vehicles. There's a lot of residential stuff is clearly happening, but there's most likely going to be a push for vans and trucks, and that there's the Ford F-150 Lightning, Rivian vans, among others that are coming that will probably serve more of a commercial basis, but these fleet vehicles can have an even larger impact on your load. So I did 3 examples. We model this in ETAP, which is, if you're not familiar, is just a power analysis software. So the first example I did was for a 500 kVA size service. So imagine like a small commercial building, maybe like a college campus building or a city hall at a municipality, maybe a really light industrial facility. They might have a single MCC or some larger panel boards and maybe a large motor load like a chiller or something like that. They want to put in a bank of level 2 EV chargers for employees or visitors, or maybe it's city vehicles that they've converted to electric. So these would just be about a 12 kVA charging load like you see from a Tesla or Ford EV. We just looked at their cut sheets and example and used it off of that. So running that in ETAP. So this is an example one line. So when you run your load analysis, so here we have your MCC, your large motor load, and your 500 kVA transformer. And say you want to run, the expected, worst case is that these all are charging at the same time, which may obviously not be likely very often. But in the event that you do, you're going to have a significant voltage drop on your system. It's going to carry a lot of load. So what we're trying to show here is just the infrastructure you got to put in. It could have an effect on the service for that customer. But where that might be something they got to account for on added distribution, power distribution, it's more opportunity for you all as far as additional load. Second example I looked at was a larger size service, so about maybe 1,000 kVA service or 2,000 kVA service. More mid-sized commercial facilities. So think like a post office, maybe a small distribution warehouse or a manufacturing facility. They might have 2 or 3 MCCs for process systems or kind of operations at the plant. They've decided to put in a level 3 DC fast charger for a small fleet of vehicles. So say these are vehicles they own. Maybe it's delivery vans or work vans. I could see a significant opportunity for like the E-Transit. I think from my research, the Ford Transit is 40% of commercial van sales. So if people want to start converting those to electric vehicles, they can have whole fleets where they kind of turn over to a van EV, and they might be charging, when folks come back from lunch or they're ending their shift for the day, they might be charging a significant amount of vans at the same time. So we suppose they put in 40-volt switchboard with 600 amp 3-phase breakers to power a 300 kVA EV charging station that might be able to handle 2 or 3 vans at the same time. Charging load would be about 100 kVA, such as the Ford Transit or an F-150 or a Rivian van. So what that looks like in a one line is it's nothing too crazy, just a little bit bigger one line than what we were showing before. But if you look at that service and you want to add, you're going to need to add roughly, say you want to add a dozen charging stations for van fleets. You're adding about 1,600 amps of load at 480 volt. They might be able to handle that on a voltage drop standpoint. Maybe they're really using those part of the time, so you could take some of these and say you want to put half of that out of service and run the same calc. You might be able to withstand that impact for that size. If they want to add, just for maybe a dozen vans, it's going to have a pretty decent impact on their load. But again, that's more energy usage from them to you all, which is a potential opportunity down the road. And then this last example, which I'll jump back to the slide for, would be a large facility. So say it's a really large distribution warehouse. Maybe this is an Amazon facility that's dropping in the, out in a rural part of the state, and they're going to have a distribution center, a fulfillment center there. It could be a large manufacturing facility. such, maybe it's a chemical plant or that kind of thing, that they have the potential for either their own vans, or maybe this is something where they might have semi trucks down the road that it could be electric, like the Tesla semis coming online. That's a pretty large time frame for when that might happen. Idea being at large, multiple MCCs, large motors for planned operations, conveying systems, fans, that kind of thing. The intent would be to put in level 3 DC fast chargers for maybe a larger set of fleet vehicles, rather than maybe a dozen vans. Maybe this is multiple dozens of vans. Similar type of power arrangement, just scaled up. We're looking at the same kind of charging load, so 1,000 kVA charging load. So what that looks like is, say they have a main time main power setup with dual 3,500 kVA transformers feeding the plant. They want to add redundant 2 banks of charging stations for fleet vehicles. So if you run that kind of load analysis, it's going to have a pretty significant impact on your system. So there might be something where you need to have them stagger their loading. Maybe they charge half their fleet middle of the day and the other half of the fleet at the end of the day. But the demand is going to be there just like it would for a residential, just the demand might be different. They might be charging vehicles at the end of the shift, or they might be charging vehicles midday during lunch breaks and that kind of thing. But again, the message here is that the demand is still significant, whether it's a small facility to a large facility. Humans tend to operate in similar schedules, right? So they're all going to be demanding this energy at generally around the same time, which is a big impact for you all. So Tesla's got a proposed semi truck coming. Order of magnitude, I think it's 5 or 6 times larger than a residential car, but so you do, kind of the thought process, maybe 10 years down the road, there's these trucks plugging into warehouses as they unload product, then they charge, they top off there, and then they continue on their way. But Kevin, back to you.
Yeah. So obviously, when you kind of think through some of these examples, there's going to be a lot of electric load added to your system. And so what can municipal utilities do to help manage the EV charging? People are going to do what's most convenient for them or what's cheapest. And so to the extent that you can implement a time of use rate, you can influence, what time of day people are charging to either minimize your demand costs from your wholesaler or move energy to the off-peak periods when prices are a little bit lower on the market. So to the left is from my app on my car. I am in the Ameren, Missouri service territory, and so the car will implement Ameren's time of use rates. Unfortunately, I don't have the right smart meter on my house yet, but I think that's going to come later in the summer, and so I don't really have access to these yet. But it kind of shows you that integrating in with the vehicle manufacturers, you can make it so that when I'm charging, I am charging at the time that's most cost effective, when it knows what rate schedule I'm under. So another example of a time of use rate design, Corn Belt Co-op in Illinois, they have a pilot program where people can opt in to a 8 cent per kilowatt hour rate all the time except for between 5 to 9 p.m., in which case it goes up double to really keep people out of that peak period. And this is for the whole house. And so that's the kind of tricky part is, the car load is only, maybe 10% of my electric usage. So it's not quite enough for for me to want to rearrange how I use all of my appliances to get them to maximize the time of use rate. So there are utilities that have experimented with separate metering or having control over the charging stations, potentially using an AMI type system to interrupt EV charging on that separate meter. Minnesota Valley Electric Cooperative, I think they were the ones that had the electric school buses that were in the previous pictures under the fleet vehicles. They have a program where you can get a separate meter for your EV system. Obviously, this is a lot of equipment and a lot of work, but it is, to the extent that you see this as something that's going to be long term, you can have a lot of impact on how people charge their vehicles and make sure that they're doing it at the most opportune time for the utility. Another thing you can do that, frankly would work on me is just ask. A lot of you are representing municipal utilities, and I know that your customers don't always love everything you do all the time, but there is some goodwill in communities that if you say that, hey, if you get a new Tesla, why don't you schedule it so that you're starting your charging session at 11 p.m. instead of maybe when you get home from work at 5:30. I kind of voluntarily did that just to kind of show that it would work, and really, unless I have somewhere to be, I have it so set up so that my charging sessions don't start until 11 p.m. and I've never been affected when I leave for work at 7 in the morning. So if there's whether it's a flyer or an insert or some public relations, you could get people to potentially do this on their own. And then, having some coordination with charging manufacturers. The one thing about these chargers, the level 2 chargers, is they are internet connected devices. And so it would be good for the industry at large, not necessarily something that any one utility can do, but to have that interaction with Tesla, with GM, with Ford, to say, hey, or with ChargePoint or some of the charging manufacturers, can we incorporate some control over the charger and then have some sort of subsidy for the car owner so that they can have some interruptibility, some ability to change whenever the bulk of the charging takes place. The holy grail that is talked about a lot is two-way charging and discharging for grid support. I am pretty dubious of this. When you look at the costs of what a utility scale battery system costs compared to what I would have to be paid to let you manipulate my battery and my cycles, that you only get so many times you can charge and recharge before you start seeing some depreciation of the range of the car. The battery on an electric vehicle is the most valuable thing to that car owner, and so you would have to subsidize it quite a bit in order for a vehicle owner to go along with that. Not to mention what that does to the car warranty and that kind of stuff. So it seems to me that if you're looking for battery backup energy storage for a utility, that they would just build that battery storage and hook it directly to the grid. I think the more likely outcome is that there would be some interruptibility of chargers like you would have with an air conditioner, so that you can have you can stagger the interruption to the charging session without having a big impact, but you could reduce your demand in total pretty significantly. Some other resources that are out there, APPA released their EV toolkit, and this is made for municipal utility managers so that they can kind of forecast what the likelihood of EVs coming into your market, how many chargers you would need for that number of electric vehicles coming on your system, some marketing materials to help you get started. And then, certainly with a lot of these new initiatives that the federal government's doing, MPUA can help you kind of sort that out to help you kind of understand what options are out there for funding different initiatives within your system. Are there any questions about electric vehicles, my experience, what we see coming, what you can do now? I'm happy to talk about it.
I see Richard Napoon has his hand raised. Richard from Marceline, you want to go?
All right, hey Richard.
Yeah. Thank you. It's kind of a question, but more of a, well, somewhat of a discussion. I was an early adopter and was also in charge of a charging station grid down in Florida 10 years ago, and I'm on my second EV right now. And of course, we're way out here in rural, so everybody around here looks at me pretty funny. The one thing that a lot of folks don't consider is other things other than just plugging in and using a load. Do you know the kilowatts or the energy usage on a regular gas pump?
I have no idea. I'm assuming that it's standard 15 amp outlet, but I really don't know that.
Yeah. And a lot of this is based on the assumption that a lot of these ICE vehicles won't be coming off the road over the next few years. So I don't know if it's so much of a load issue as it is a distribution issue from gas stations to back to the residents who are doing these things. And that's how I saw it, because I considered a lot of things. I think it's the power of a gas pump is like 3,960 kilowatts. And of course, power and energy are two different
Sure.
definitions there. The power of the electric charging is 1.5, and the gas pump is 2,640 times more powerful than the electric cord. Well, I don't use a gas pump anymore, so there is now electricity not being used. And our family has two hybrids. One is the original commercial production hybrid, the Honda Insight, the little space pod looking thing. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the gas is going bad in the Insight before I can even use it. But the hybrid now is fueled up probably a third less than before, because we use this other one for regional. So the power at the pump not being used is saved. And that's not even including the trucks that have to haul in the fuel and the moving parts issue, the 2,000 versus the 20 on average. So now there's less repairs, which means less trucks having to bring in stuff or using smaller box trucks. So there's a bigger picture, and I didn't see it as it being a load issue more than a distribution issue. So, I guess it all depends on people's use, the demographics, their locations.
Yeah, I mean, in the rural parts of the state, I mean, it's going to be slower, kind of. I mean, so it's harder to get, from Marceline to your neighboring town. It's further distance than it is from one suburb to the next. But you also probably don't get as many miles getting around town. So you can there are some people that aren't doing cross-state trips that would be fine with an electric vehicle. So I think it'll take a while. Again, if you look at the Norway example, they've really pushed it hard, and still 85% of the cars are are internal combustion. So gas stations aren't going away anytime soon. It's really just more of a supplement, and it's down the road, it's going to be just more of the new vehicles that are produced are going to be electric vehicles, and so your options are going to be different whenever you go to the dealer lot.
Right. I calculated a 1-to-5 ratio on I get 125 mpge, the equivalent. And the average in 2019, I think, was 24.9 miles per gallon of a regular ICE vehicle, which means that my one time is 5 cars. And so if more EVs come onto the market, that's less people having to fuel up using the electricity at the gas pump versus using it at home. So, and I gain miles for what I use it for. I actually started with a 234-mile range Monday. I'm now at 254, and I haven't done anything other than just drive around town.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of weirdness to these things, but they're fun. Anyway, congrats on being an adopter.
Yeah, I would say that's the one thing that I think a lot of people miss is it is fun. I mean, it is very different than an internal combustion car. It's really quick, and I think people will like that driving experience if they give it a shot. And I'm not an evangelist. I have 2 internal combustion cars, for my wife and my daughter, and I drive them all the time too. But it's more of a experience for me, and so I think it'll take a little time to catch on.
Roger that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Richard. The next person we have that's raised their hand is our own Rebecca Atkins at MPUA. She's the Chief Markets Officer here at MPUA. Rebecca?
Good morning. Thanks for the presentation. You talked a lot about the type of use rates, which I think would apply to the residential type chargers. What do you see as far as the public charging? Is there any consistency in rates, and does it show the rates for charging on the apps when it locates? Just curious how those are priced.
So my experience, you can see what the rates are. Again, I was looking at the Ameren is set up fast chargers every 30 miles or so on the east-west corridors coming out of St. Louis, which is where we're based. Basically, it's about 3 times what the residential rate is, the summer residential rate. So it's I don't know that they're necessarily making a margin on that, but they're definitely recovering their infrastructure costs. The Tesla, I don't know how they put that through, but I know that you are better off with the residential rate rather than the fast chargers. I think most of the people that have electric vehicles would say that the fast chargers are really just for if you need it, or if you're traveling, or if you're desperate. Or if you're in an apartment. I mean, that's one of the things that's really missing about this is I have a nice garage with a breaker box right next to where I park my car, so it was really easy to implement this. But if you're in an apartment complex or an older home, you might not have the same infrastructure at your residence available to make this an easy addition. So there could be a future where there is more public charging, and maybe it's something where you're working with the local utility to be able to charge your vehicle in a public environment, kind of like the solar subscription services that people did, where there's some ability to have the infrastructure in one place and you would go and charge it there.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions?
Well, we really appreciate your time. I think that you will end MPUA has our contact information if you want to reach out to either Pat or myself. And if anything comes to mind, I'd be happy to chat with you further offline.
All right, and we certainly want to thank Kevin and Pat for joining us today. We especially thank CDG Engineers for this presentation and their patron sponsorship at MPUA. They're based right out of St. Louis, Missouri, and I'd encourage you to reach out to us if you want to get in touch with them, or you can go to our website to the associate member page and find CDG Engineers there to make contact. If there are no other questions, I would hope that each of you have a good day. And again, thank you, Kevin and Pat.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good day. Thank you.